Yeah, y'all are now on recording. Good luck. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully that connects. We'll find out if my live stream works. It does. Cool. So yeah, what does religion? I answered a little bit. Hey, like how I'm doing today. Doing fine. Also, alienation issues. But what does religion mean to me? Honestly, I'm a bit torn. I'm an atheist, just flat out. I find religion really fascinating as a topic, and that's why I've zeroed in a lot on this lecture on, hey, let's talk about Marx and religion, especially since people ignore that with Marx a lot. So, what does religion mean to me? I kind of agree with what a few of y'all are saying about it's a way of understanding people, it's a culture. I also agree a lot with what Marx says about why people drawn to religion. Marx says it's due to social pains. I think it's more than that. I think there's also a sense of community that comes with it. Social effervescence, which comes from Emile Durkheim, hate the dude, but I will reference him once in a while. Um, it just it creates an interesting culture and community that I think can even be extended to other groups. I mean, we see in like music scenes, a lot of people have like basically have a different headspace when they're at a concert and dancing, or I mean, you go to punk shows, you can tell me more about that. I gestured that to you specifically, but I know that's like half of this room. But specifically with these two decked out people in front of me. Yeah. But like this sense of of like what religion means, I think it can be split between the feeling of religion and the community of religion. And that's one thing I want to intro this into a little bit. Because as Marx talks about religion and it comes up, he's thinking in these terms, not explicitly at all, but he does effectively hit a lot upon what does divinity mean, and also what does religion and a community around it mean, and how do they interplay? What's the difference between Catholics, Protestants, and Jews and atheists? He slightly touches upon all these. We're gonna get into that. So let's get into that. Just general outline for today. We're going to start off with some more background. Y'all heard me talking about Marx's life. We're talking about Marx's life again. Um, Little correction from last week. So up until the end of last week, he was in Bonn. At this point, he's now moving to Berlin to continue his doctorate. We're gonna get into more of that in a minute. And we're gonna end today's lecture with him fleeing Trier and going to Paris to escape Prussian censorship. So we'll go over his background, his family, him as a student, Jenny von Westphalen, his eventual wife, him and his father, their interesting relationship. Going to touch upon a letter that they wrote, hope, especially with the letter assignment coming up soon. Soon, that's something I want to quickly touch upon. Also, if y'all saw on the canvas that like suddenly like there was due dates, due dates, due dates. Yeah, it's like they're all technically due at the end of the semester. That is just so when you check what to do on Canvas, they appear and it's broken up into like, okay, this is coming up soon. I should think about this. So it's still everything's due at the end of the semester. It's just I have it set to like due date like next week, more as a like, oh, I should probably work on this and not wait till the end of the semester. I don't want y'all to have to cram last second. After that, we get into the young Hegelians. Marx contends with them a lot throughout his life, and especially at this point. Then we'll move on to his doctoral thesis specifically, a little bit about what was going on there. Then the families, we extend back out to now Marx just graduated. What was his relationship with his family, with von Westphalen's families? We go into his life as a journalist, and then him leaving. After that, we'll actually transition into a little bit of Hegel, a bit about what was going on there, and finally end today's lecture talking about on the Jewish question. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll see. Um, So let's just start with some background. You've heard me mention it now 3 weeks in a row. Marx was born in Trier, uh, near Luxembourg in the Rhineland. This is just summary from the past few weeks. Here, however, there was an interesting thing about them. They came out as a German country shortly after Marx was born. Before that, they were French. Then Prussia came in and decided to make them Prussia. So, despite them now being technically Prussian, there's a lot of background French sentiments, which also which plays an interesting role throughout Trier. It's a Catholic majority town, after all. Um, Trier specifically, he didn't exactly like France at first. When they first got captured by Prussia, they were like, okay, we're out. We can actually now practice our religious views more. Then they realized, oh, Prussians are kind of censoring us and pushing us down. The French Revolution, they got some benefits, and now they just gave that way to absolute monarchy. So it wasn't exactly the best vibes, to put it lightly. Well, their freedom of speech was revoked, freedom of press was severely limited. Really, it's what you would imagine. In addition, shortly after, there was crop failures and rising taxes. So anyone who was decently well off, well, sucks to suck. You ain't well off anymore. Um, and then, and on top of all that, this was leading to a lot of anti-establishment type of sentiments. And establishment at that time meant monarchy. And a little bit of capitalism, but capitalism was still developing. So we start to see early socialist and anti-patriotism forming in this region, creating a really interesting bubble to exist in. And Marx was at the center of all this. He was a German, effectively a German Jew who was forced to convert to to Protestantism in a Catholic majority town. Well, there was a lot of political whole like bubbling around him. But let's get a bit more into Marx's family. Also, if at any point y'all have like any questions or comments, y'all been in this class before, you know how it goes. Just be like, yo, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so heck yeah. So Marx's family. I mentioned Marx was a German Jew. He actually comes from a long line of rabbis, including his grandfather being a rabbi and his uncles also being, but his father converted to Protestantism. His father wasn't a extremely religious man, but to protect his job as being a lawyer, converted because, well, are you going to want to practice your faith or eat? It was a pretty easy decision for his father to make there. So his father converted, but but his mother delayed a little bit. Up until I want to say he was about 8 years old, was when his mother converted to Protestantism, and it wasn't consensual. She was effectively forced to by her family. But that's enough about Marx's his father and mother. What about his sisters? He had five siblings who died and three that survived into old age. Dude was surrounded by death from a young age. It's the middle of the well, not middle, beginning of the 1800s. This wasn't abnormal. Most of them died due to tuberculosis, and Marx himself would later die due to a pulmonary disease late in life. No worries. So Marx, he had family, but he saw himself almost as if he was an only child because he was just like, why should he care? people die all around him. But Marx is like, but also Marx, like I said, he had a lung issue, which was exacerbated by his military service. When he eventually got out of the military and like, and survived because weak lungs, he wasn't doing well. He was he was called Glückchen. Oh, sorry, Glückchen, sorry, Glückkind, meaning direct translation is luck child, but it's sometimes also translated as for a child of fortune. Hmm. But Heinrich Marx, Marx's father, I mean, yeah, actually, I already covered most of the rest of this slide. His father, lawyer, even after converting, still prioritized helping other Jewish immigrants. He focused on the legal cases, especially when it came to usury, which think of usury as like giving out and taking loans. So he was still very involved in the Jewish community, even if he no longer was legally considered Jewish. And legally is an important term here. It'll come up way later when we're getting into who is on the Jewish question. And then lastly, him and his mother had an interesting relationship. They didn't get along super well. His mother was a source of stress for the most part. But also, she was a Dutch immigrant who never learned to speak German and was never even literate. And I see that my slides decided to cut off. That's fun. But you get the point. They may have not had a great relationship, but she had a lot of stresses on her back. She was forced to convert to a religion that she did not believe in. She was forced to move to a place where she didn't speak the language. And she couldn't write to anyone. She had no connection to anyone besides her direct family. And this is the 1800s. Rights for women wasn't exactly good at the time. I understand why she might have been a little bit on edge 24/7. So that is just something to note here. But yep, uh, Dutch, Dutch, yeah, Dutch, Danish. Okay. Well, well, cool. If you did get his name, let me know. Damn. Okay, cool. He definitely, dude, just definitely leave and gave. Yeah, he left a class talking about. Well, all right, have fun, Jordan. All right, so let's continue the lecture for now. I'm not going to exacerbate anything, and Jordan's not a student here. He's doing stuff of his own free will. So, moving on. Do y'all need to take a moment before we continue? Actually, I'm just gonna shut the door. Jordan knows where we are. Like I do. I don't know. Like I mean, everyone. I mean, to be fair, most of us are pretty out with it. Hell yeah. Um, I am still on a live stream, so do be a little wary. He like don't give out too many personal details, y'all. Um, but yeah, moving moving forward for now. Yeah. All right. So Marx, very young Marx, like him as a child, wasn't super well known. I mean, makes sense. Yeah, yeah, exactly. He was like a child. But so the first time we really start having any like real evidence of Marx was some exams in his in 1835. Still not that much, nothing to write home about. I'm not really even going to get. I didn't even know what it was really, but you do well. Actually, yeah, surprisingly, yes. What do you know? So he his high school was only 32 students. But he graduated top six out of the 22 who graduated. Oh yeah, that's real impressive. Yeah, I mean pretty watch. There we go. So yeah, Marx. He had an interesting. I'm not saying he had an interesting. My brain's still on the last slide. Damn. You're still on the Nazi salute. Yeah, no, my brain is definitely still on the dude giving a Nazi salute and walking out of class. While taking all of our pictures. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to report that to Dan afterwards.
That
And
is
let him
like
know.
that is threat of violence.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, and I don't have a recording of him doing that, but we do have a recording of this happening. So
And all of us as witnesses.
yeah,
And we all saw it. We all saw it. He was recorded well, too. So what's the point? What is he doing?
yeah.
He's just trying to intimidate us. That's how passionate.
Yeah, that's
Again, what the hell?
you know, I think
Just imagine what their reason you'll see.
you know, I think we'll divert a little bit from today's lecture for a minute. Because let's just talk about process group. Yeah, let's just process fucking fascism and theory in relation to fascism. I think we need to divert for a minute and we'll come back to this. So,
what brings anarchists and Marxists together if there was a common theme?
Yeah. So, if anyone's watching on, I see I have like 5 viewers on here. It's going to be a bit of a different lecture than what the title says.
And a detour.
Yeah. So, yeah, fascism and communism. I don't know how to transition to this lead. Um, yeah, I think that like you said, fascism arrives in fear. I mean, I remember back in my hometown, a big reason why I couldn't find other leftists get or build a sense of community with other leftists was because of that fear of fascism. Like my hometown has open neo-Nazis. I mean, apparently also who San Francisco State University does, but fun. There to your Chavez. You don't have to gaze out.
What?
I don't know if it's still there. There's some public graffiti up in Cedar Chavez. Oh yeah, that one. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Cedar Chavez Tower, you remember when it goes to tag? Has a sharpie homophobic graffiti up there. Yeah. Yeah. So but so does like terrible on 19th Avenue until like midnight last night. But here's the thing about fascism and communism and such, because you know we have a long history of beating the fuck out of each other. So the main thing is Spanish Civil War Part Two.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
I don't think we should do that one. But
let's learn from our mistakes there.
yeah, we learn from our mistakes there, and this is where having a community of leftists helps, because when shit like that happens, we can stand strong together. I remember during the Palestine encampments that like one of the things we were prepping for was if people come here to intimidate, if people come here to cause violence, how do we stand up and stay strong together? Did he leave something?
What really?
Share the class.
It looks like a Nazi movie.
Ooh, let's see.
Let me see that. Yes.
Oh, it is.
It's fine, it is.
Yeah.
What the hell?
I'm not putting that on the video. Cool. Yeah.
Oh. Oh.
Pure adulterated truth that will bring the strongest men to tears and the weakest of men to anger. Whoever the hell that is.
That's destiny.
Oh, look at the back
Oh,
right now.
Blackbird. Okay. Honesty.com slash at blackpill :B slash black.
No, actually, wait. Stop reading it out. I am recording. I don't want this to get advertised. So let's not read that out loud. Actually.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But look at the back. Yeah. Well, like, yeah. cool. So,
Can I just actually tie in, you're talking about alienation too, because when we're all afraid of fascism, that translates into our like interpersonal anxieties. And I know a lot of people, including myself, have been going through a lot recently, and we're all a little bit too afraid to reach out to each other and engage in actual mutual aid. So we do this like insanely fucking capitalist thing where we all in our own little bubbles don't reach out because we don't want to overstep, we don't want to be embarrassing, we don't want to like be denied the opportunity to help and like be awkward. We don't want to awkwardly show up to clean up someone's house. And then have it be strange because we don't have a
yeah.
community.
I'm going to keep that just for evidence for Dan, by the way. Just so you know, because otherwise I would tear that shit up instantly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Toss it into the fire.
Yeah. It's really important because I thought that was
Yeah. But yeah, so when shit like that happens, the important thing is that we stand together, that there are people against us, but if we prepare for that, we can stand together stronger when a little fucking Nazi decides to come into class. I mean, like I was saying, during the during the pro-Palestine movements and the encampments, we prepped in case people try to fuck with us. I mean, we know that people are going to stand against us, so we got to stand together stronger. Solidarity's important, and solidarity should not be forgotten in the face of fear. If anything, that should strengthen it for us. Because you run away, hey, and we splinter, there's no one there to stand with you and protect you. But you stand with others to protect them, they'll stand with you back.
Next time, should, would you advise we not give a person like that the Richard Spencer treatment? That, yeah,
What is
What does that
what,
mean?
what Antifa did, touching Richard Spencer in the back of the head.
I cannot condone violence as a teacher that's being recorded, but what you do in your with your own free will, especially if you're not enrolled in this course, I cannot speak. So what I'm saying is on recording, I am not advertising for violence in in my class.
My favorite, hope I stop glitching.
Yeah. Yeah, no, if you need to step out for a minute, go for it.
Drugs, that just happens.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Content trauma.
Yeah. I will say this conversation has kept pretty high consistent viewership. This is going to be okay. Another side tangent before we get back to the main lecture. Here is like when I was trying to research Marx and religion, it was pretty difficult to find things on it. So this is probably going to be one of the So this is probably going to be one of the like main videos that appear when people search it. In this instance, it's going to be in the middle of it. So that's fine. But
I'm keeping my phone, by the way, on. I'm turning it from vibrate to actually just like call in case Jordan needs.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So I'm sorry
Yeah.
for the interruption.
You're
The
good.
most I can do is a verbal reprimand.
Yeah. So, moving forward though, um, so yeah, Marx did well in high school. He he originally planned on being a lawyer. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but he got to Bonn, and the Romanticism movement was occurring. So Marx fell in love with Romanticism. Well, and while he was there studying to be a lawyer, and he was like, "Damn, I really don't want to be a lawyer." Yeah, there we go. Yeah, no, I mean, originally he was going to be a lawyer. Then he was like, I really like this. I really like poetry. I really like poetry. And also, I really like philosophy. And like, the law is cool, but like, I really like philosophy and poetry. So he wrote a poem. So he started writing poems, and it was actually in these poems that he started to view himself as an atheist. And Marx never tried to hide that he was an atheist. As far as I can tell, he was always open about it. He was never like, "Oh, but I do believe in God and legally." He was never like that. He was always like, "Yeah, so what?" Marx. It was hard to get Marx to shut up about anything. So if he had a belief, you were going to know about it. But as he was talking with his father, Marx would switch from law to academia. And while he was then switched and moved to Berlin to study philosophy, his father got horribly sick and died. One of the saddest things is it was an expensive ride to go from Berlin to Trier. They're across the country from each other. And
Sort of.
You look. Well, you got Wednesday classes. We'll keep an eye on it because, like, hey, maybe it's not a week three thing. Maybe it's a week 16 thing.
yeah, so that is definitely something to note. But
Well, I'm pointing out if you have it on live stream, you have the audio.
oh yeah,
In case we actually need to contact campus police, like, no, really, something happened. This actual serious thing happened. Point in time.
Campus police thinks I can't eat toast. I don't know if they can help us.
I have a record on the without
oh yeah, show them the yeah, show them that. I am getting back to the lecture a little
No,
bit. No, y'all are good. Y'all are good. After the class, we're going to definitely take a minute to just decompress.
Well, those guys.
Yep. Um. So
All those guys.
yeah. So Marx's father ended up dying while he was in Berlin. Marx knew he was sick and actually got a carriage and took several days off to go see him. But carriage rides are expensive, and Marx had a train to catch to get back. So Marx ended up leaving him while his father was sick, and his father died a few days after he left. Which I'm bringing this point up specifically because it's often used against Marx as like a, oh he didn't care about people. His father, he didn't even go see his dying father, and was with him when he was dying because he couldn't
It's
afford
just
to
a
be.
classic immigrant experience.
Yeah.
You leave your
Don't
family
like
lives and you come back
yeah.
with a ton of money.
Exactly. Like, exactly.
We're flying back to
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
I'm saving that for evidence, by the way. Bet. But yeah, so Marx, he had an interesting time. But there's more than just Marx in this story. Marx also there was also Jenny von Westphalen, his eventual wife, but there's more to her than just being the wife of a famous man. She she was the daughter of nobility. She was she was effectively the upper class as for Tyr, at least as upper class as you could get for Tyr. Her father was Ludwig von Westphalen, and her brother Egger. Yeah, so her family and the Marxes were surprisingly close. They both went. They shared the same churches. They were both members of the Casino Society. They threw balls and such together. And both Heinrich Marx, Marx's father, and Ludwig, both were pretty damn close as people. Marx even Karl Marx even studied under Ludwig for a while, and where his love of philosophy stemmed from. And honestly, it's really interesting seeing. I would call him Jenny because I feel like it's easier than saying Marx, Marx, Marx. Um, their relationship is marked by differences, upper class versus lower class. Yes, someone who's a Jewish immigrant versus someone who's literally nobility, and they formed a relationship that would last till their deaths. And before even Marx and Jenny, Carl and Jenny got together, Jenny was part of their circle. Well, Sophia, Marx, and Jenny were great friends, and they would still sometimes fight each other up until the very end. And Marx would write Jenny love poetry all the time. I know later in here I have a little bit of a quote where it wasn't directly to Jenny, but it was still about her from Marx that I think is just beautiful. But this did I forget to update this slide? Cool. We ignore this slide. So I guess we're gonna moving on to that letter. Sure.
This letter is beautiful. It's such a great it's such a beautiful piece of writing.
So this letter, I'm also highlighting this because of the letter assignment that's coming up. You don't have to do anything intense. Everything you see here, if you submitted this to me, I would accept it easy. You don't even need the quote. You could write that away, and I'd still accept it. Um, the letter to his father really just this letter was him expressing his contradiction between wanting to be a lawyer like his father, but his love of philosophy and love of romanticism. And there's this girl, Jenny, that they're already engaged, but he's like, I miss her. And here in this letter, he also brings up some group known as the Doctors Club, the Young Hegelians, as they would later become known as. And ultimately, he at the end, after he signs off, says like basically just like your best, Karl Marx. At the end, he has like a little PS. Forgive me, Father, the illegible script and poor style. It is nearly 4 in the morning, and the candle it is completely burnt out. My eye and the eyes dim. A true unrest has taken mastery of me, and I will not be able to calm the excited spirits until I'm in your dear presence. Please give my greetings to my sweet dear Jenny. Her letters have been already read 12 times through. I'm always discovering new delights. It is in every respect, including style, the most beautiful letter I can imagine from a woman. So at the very end, he was like, make sure Jenny sees this. He, even if he was pretty bad about actually writing to her, she was always on his mind. And she would become his like first reader for everything. But at this time, he's in Berlin. So let's focus a bit more on Berlin for a second here. Marx Marx titled the Young Hegelians the Doctors Club when he was in Berlin. This why do you call them that? Probably because a lot of them had PhDs and studied under Hegel. But that's my assumption. I really don't know. It's just a name Marx and only Marx has attached to the group of young Hegelians in Berlin. But he worked within these groups for a while. He found other atheists who studied Hegel, and at first he was really into it. He loved Hegel, and then he was like, "Wait a moment, I'm not sure if this is accurate. I'm not sure if you guys are reading Hegel the same way I'm reading Hegel." He he started to detach a bit from the young Hegelians because he was like, "Wait a moment, Hegel's clearly pushing atheism here. You are pushing for a Christian version of Hegel, and the Prussian state was pushing for a Christian version of Hegel, almost as if he was a state philosopher, and Prussia at this time, Christian state. So Marx starts to have this like disagreement, and in addition, this is where Marx really gains ideas of different classes. Now, Hegel focused on social classes, not economic. He focused on are you nobility? Are you serf? Not what is your position to means of production? Not how much do you make? Just how are you seen socially? This idea actually comes back later in sociology. Way after Marx dies, through the idea of cultural capital, but that's going to be saved for if y'all take a sociology class. But I'll yam to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Once your nails, you do.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic.
So there's this notion of social class that is introduced here. And it just inspires Marx a little bit. He doesn't address it directly yet. He does way later, but yeah, he starts off with that. And Berlin was an interesting place at this time. Anyone who was going to become a famous radical was in Berlin here. Both Friedrich Engels and Bakunin studied and interacted with these same young Hegelians Marx did even if they never met. I mean, I know you always tell me a story about how Marx was in the same classroom as someone else.
Certain character, yeah, right in Berlin at the same time, and I believe it was Schelling's lectures here on Hegel. So
Yeah,
yeah, no, I wish they'd met.
yeah. So this was a place of just like radicalism. And there was these ideas going around, especially in Schelling's lectures, of positive philosophy and negative philosophy. Positive meaning it comes from mythology, so think of like religious philosophy. It's coming from these ideas and stories. And then negative philosophy, which Schelling didn't really focus on at all, which came from ideas of material existence. What is a chair? How do we know it's a chair? Those types of things. So while Schelling focused on positive, you can see the beginning of Marx's materialism forming here. I think that covers everything on that slide. Yeah, also politically viewed as anti-Christian because Hegel, atheism, they're in like a weird contradiction with like they're making Hegel religious, but also not at the same time. So they were seen as anti-Prussian, but also kind of pro-Prussian. They got into a lot of political hot water just constantly. But moving forward, Marx finishes all his courses and he writes his doctorate. And he realizes, I don't want to deal with censorship. So he decides to mail his thesis to Jenna in Tuninga. And there, he actually doesn't defend his thesis in person. He sends the letter, he writes his defense, mails it, and he's approved. He doesn't have to go into an in-person defense. Now, Jenna was kind of known for giving easy doctors, just flat out. How it wasn't a difficult process for Marx, but he also felt like if he tried to defend it in Berlin, he'd have to change and rewrite everything because Russian authorities would be like, nope, that's too anti-Christian, too anti his state beliefs. This won't pass, and you're going to get messed up. So he had to change it. And well, if he stayed in Berlin, he didn't. So what was his thesis on? It was on the idea of the atom, the smallest thing you could at the time imagine. What is material reality and what is knowledge? Kant was still pretty big at this time, so knowledge was still on the minds of everyone. And he used Hegel's dialectics to explore her not just a religious philosophy like the Doctors Club did, but material reality and how our ideas of religion and such has a lot of the material world around it. If you think of heaven and hell in the Christian sense, you think of like of clouds and sunny days versus hell being literal fire and brimstone. Yeah, that's the material world influencing the spiritual world and having this remnants of the opposite in it. That was a big part of his thesis. Now, I'll be completely real. I didn't read his thesis. I just don't have the time to prep that much for this class. But it is something that is worth taking a note of for his development. And we also see with this idea of if we take
I want to say that his thesis was contrasting Democritus and Epicurus. And Hegel was used in his thesis, but it was between Democritus and Epicurus, differing views on atomism, because they had different versions of atomism. But Democritus is like a very little known pre-Socratic philosopher because none of his works have survived, and they're mostly known through Epicurus. Um,
Being one of the people who proposed what we would now see as modern atomic theory, Democritus proposed that all matter is eventually made of the atomos, the uncuttable, that you could cut matter down to small point. There would come a point where it could be uncuttable. Now we know there's smaller things than just the atom, but that an ancient Greek thought of this, 25, basically atomic theory is a pretty interesting historical thing. But yeah, as Brian was saying, there's a juxtaposition between Epicurus and Democritus.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
Right, and that's we're teaching it now. It's actually in high school chemistry.
Yeah, good.
Like, hey, check this out. These ideas go back to ancient times because
That's so neat.
really it's a thought experiment. Before you have an electron microscope, you just have to think about what is the nature of matter. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah. Also, Marx was kind of just a science nerd, so that makes sense. But yeah, so the thing is, this idea of like using nature as the basis of argument is interesting because this starts to build his ideas of base and superstructure. Starting to be okay, how does material reality influence these big ideas that we are surrounded about around, and how does that then re-influence what we're exposed to through the state and through community? So this isn't base and superstructure, but this is the beginnings of him forming into those ideas. And at the time, Marx he was planning on being a professor. He wanted to teach. He was like, what else are you going to do with a philosophy degree? So, yeah, so that was his goal. And after he graduated, he could not find a job, which makes sense. He was part of the Young Hegelians, and they were seen as anti-Prussian state. Even if Marx hated the Young Hegelians, he was associated with them. So, because of that, even if it was a loose association, that killed his any potential of him being a professor.
Part of the reason he couldn't get a job was also because his handwriting was illegible. He tried to work at the post office, but they looked at his handwriting and said, "Can't." Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he is a doctor,
yeah.
technically.
Is your doctor in this carriage?
Yeah.
Oh, please go. Sorry.
Yeah. It was also because he was, known to be an anti-Prussian agitator that the post office couldn't take him.
Yeah, there was a lot of those sentiments, but yeah, so when you can't become a professor, he did what everyone else did with a doctorate degree, become a journalist. But we'll get to his journals in a second. He does come back to Tier after he graduates, on the job hunt, trying to figure out what to do. He can't continue forward, so we just kind of continue where we're at. Um, and when he comes back, he ended up dedicating his thesis to Ludwig von Westphalen, Jenny's father, for being such a great inspiration. Then the dude died a year later. So I don't know. I find that kind of sweet though that like Ludwig's closest friend's son dedicated a doctoral thesis to him, and his mentee basically hey, I'm here because of you. I feel like that's just really sweet. But with Jenny's father's passing, Carl and Jenny got married. There wasn't a father to ask, but they got the blessings of Jenny's mother and the scorn of her brother. Okay, her Ferdinand, hated Carl so much. Their entire life is like basically Marx was doing this thing. Ferdinand hated it because he works for the Prussian government, and the Prussian government doesn't appreciate his brother-in-law being the guy who's known as the father of communism. Right at this time, Marx is not a communist yet. He's getting ideas. He's surrounded by some socialists, but if we had to attach a label, maybe social democrat, maybe probably more of a liberal, but that's where we were.
Like the security apparatus for any oppressive state, it doesn't even matter how fairly liberal you might be. If you're a threat to the status quo, the security apparatus is going to blow itself up over the whole concept of like, oh, you're threatening, it's gonna inflate, put a bunch of things on you, call you even if you're not, because it doesn't matter. You're the most milk toast keep of the system. It's not acceptable.
So yeah, but they eventually got married pretty soon in on June 19th, in 1843. And at this point, with Carl and Jenny together, this is where Jenny became such a big part of Marx's life, going from a muse to now being his first reader, the person who he got to debate and contend every new idea with, the person who would take his horrible handwriting and make it legible. Without Jenny, there would be no Carl. The without one Marx, there wouldn't have been the other. But he was a journalist, so Marx eventually traveled back to Bonn to pursue this career in writing. We just mentioned his handwriting's kind of bad. So take that as you will. Well, there, he first started publishing under Rheinische Zeitung, which just basically means like, think of it as like the Rhineland in Germany. That's just where this newspaper was. So it would be like the Bay Area Express type of naming.
I mean, like he means newspaper, so clearly the Rhineland is.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then he would just use the pseudonym Rhinelander, or just to kind of hide who he is, known as being anti-Prussian in Prussia. The news, it's probably good to hide your name a little bit. But, and while there, he studied law. He knows how the censorship works and the censorship laws ins and out. And he uses that to his advantage. He uses that to circumvent censorship and get around all these issues. And it works for a time, but even with him in playing around with the laws, they eventually still shut down the newspaper because, well, there's anti-Prussian sentiments, even if he never directly calls out for it. But that's the less important part. Marx will have many shut down newspapers throughout his life. Um, this becomes a very common story very fast with Marx. There we go. But one of his breakout articles that really got Marx known at the time was one about uh, Prussian peasants who, for hundreds of years, if not thousands, would go into the Black Forest, take scrap wood from home and use it for building, use it for fire, use it for whatever they needed. Then Russia decided to make a law where no, that's private property now. You can't control this. You can't touch this. There's someone else owns this land, and Marx covered that news story in great detail.
And it may not even be making new law, it may just have been, we're gonna enforce a law that's been on the book for 10,000 years. Like that's one of the things that happened with Norman conquest in England, is all of a sudden you see all these laws written to basically say, oh, actually deadfall? No, deadfall is the property of the Lord. You can't gather it without asking permission. So it's literally one of those things where it's like, oh, there can be the right of collecting wood, it can be the right that you've exercised for 1,000 years as a natural right, but it's actually a property right, it's assigned to somebody else. And it's a great critique he writes where he's talking about like, wait a minute, so this guy owns the wood because his great grandfather was the oppressor to steal the land in the first place. But these people need to write it. So yeah, it's a great, that article is a great piece of writing.
Yeah, yeah. Also, the thing is like we have an article assignment coming up. There's a great article to cover. Yeah,
Wrote a whole book just about that one art.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful art.
yeah. So, yeah. And Marx also has this one quote. I don't know where it's from exactly, but one of the things he mentions is like, no man combats freedom, at most he combats the freedom of others. It might be from this article. I'll be honest, I kind of just jotted it down in my notes and I didn't write down where it came from. So vague attached to Marx at that one. And Marx saw it as the duty of the press to stand on the side of the peasantry and speak on their behalf since they couldn't. They were illiterate. They didn't have like any legal rights. So who was going to stand up for them? Well, the press were. At least that was Marx's philosophy.
I wanted to note another quote that's much more famous than that one, that was published when he was working at the Rhine newspaper. After the Prussian government told them that they would be shutting them down, he published, while he was the editor, he published uh, an issue in all red ink,
Yep.
where one of the articles is talking about the censorship, and he says, when our turn comes, we will make no excuses for the terror."
Yeah.
It's a very famous quote because he was saying, we're going to be honest when we use terror. We're not going to just seize your newspaper and say we didn't know you were radical. And say seize your newspapers because we knew your politics.
Yeah. You're going to seize the newspaper. It's because you did a Hitler salute and walked out of class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What he's saying is, so in one of the last issues of the Reiner Zeitung was that they knew they were being shut down. Like they knew the Prussian government, so they published the entire issue. Is instead of being in black ink, it's in red ink. The red ink is the whole article, and there's a quote where they're saying, he said basically, "We will make no apologies for the terror when our turn comes." So basically saying that, look, we're not going to pussyfoot around and be legalistic about it. Like, oh, well, it turns out you were actually fomenting rebellion. It's going to be like, we seized your newspaper. We did whatever direct action was necessary because you you have continued to use law and the right on your side to oppress people. So when it's time, be on notice that it will happen, and it's going to be like it's going to come.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for breaking it.
Yeah. And like, so, Marx just kind of lost his job and he can't be a professor. What's one to do when you're kind of not able to work in the country that you live in? You leave to another country. So Marx ends up moving to Paris. Now, we're going to get more into him in Paris next week, but he effectively flees Prussia because of this censorship. Now, he's not being kicked out of Prussia, he's choosing to leave. But when you're someone who's as politically active as Marx, it makes sense that you're going to want to leave a country when you're being actively suppressed. I mean, that's kind of what's starting to go on now, and yeah.
Although Marx was able to escape, a lot of his friends were arrested when he fled Prussia because they did not flee in time.
Yeah.
Directly after, or was it like a coincidence?
I mean, his friends were political agitators, so.
Well, yeah, I see.
Yeah, so they were arrested because
Of their personal political
yeah,
Yeah.
and because the shutting down of the newspaper was part of like a wave of suppression from the Prussian government, at the command of the Russian Tsar, actually.
So, yeah. And yeah. And like when he was leaving, he was like, this is where he really separated himself from Hegel. This is where he was like, okay, I need to be done being dogmatic about Hegel and saying Hegel is right in everything. Maybe Hegel's wrong, which took Marx a long time to get around to that idea. So he attaches to a new person, Feuerbach. And he's like, you know who has good critiques of Hegel? Feuerbach. That's my new dogma. He'll eventually break with Feuerbach as well. But for now, he basically jumped to make a probably bad comparison. I know you're going to end up correcting me on this. Um, it's like he went from studying like he basically went from being in love with Plato to being in love with Foucault.
Wait,
I,
wait.
no, because there was a jump to someone who critiqued the other. I don't know much about Foucault. I just want to say that to get a reaction out of you.
Thank you for giving me that article, so now I know why that matters so much. Is this who by the way?
It just Hegel. It does make
Yeah.
because those two are
Galen,
not the same.
brother.
So
from Althusser to Foucault. Okay. Yeah.
Probably
think
better.
that makes more sense.
Probably a better comparison, but I want to see a reaction. So with that,
And Portuguese
yeah,
so easily.
yeah. With that being said, Marx at this time has an interesting relationship with religion. Like his father was pretty kind of passive towards it. It's like, yeah, I'm faithful. I believe in God, sure. He converted religion on so super easily just to keep his career. He was religious in a lot of ways, like Christians in San Francisco are. We're like, yeah, I'm religious, and then they kind of move on with their day.
Service. They don't even talk to their churches. It's so weird here.
Yeah, like, but his mother was very much a devout Jew. She very much, well, followed her faith and was part of it until she was forced to not be. And then he moved to Berlin, was surrounded uh, by atheist philosophers, and then he was distancing himself from Hegel and saw Feuerbach and was like, Feuerbach has interesting takes. Maybe God is just a conceptual object. So he's exposed to all these really different ideas, because all at the same time, and that I feel like all that being thrown at him with so many different pushes and pulls, that creates an interesting perception of religion. And because Feuerbach turned religion into anthropology, studying religion was now about studying material conditions. And Marx was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. But, we move forward to Feuerbach. Right.
Okay. I've had a lot of caffeine, so I may talk fast.
Ah,
Might
So
do it.
okay.
Yeah, just so you know where to.
Yes, I will do. Yeah. Feuerbach was born in 1804 in Landshut, Bavaria. Um, or rather, it it wasn't quite Bavaria, sort of Bavaria. Um, he was affiliated with the Young Hegelians. He definitely went to some of those lectures. Um, and he developed a form of materialism and atheism that Marx would later merge with Hegelian dialectics to create dialectical materialism. Um, the atheism and materialism that Marx and Feuerbach, well, that Feuerbach was really known for was in his book, The Essence of Christianity, which was really influential in the development of the philosophical atheism of Marx and Engels. Um, the essence of Christianity, like what Noah was saying, is supposed to be an anthropological study of an abstract Christian, not a real Christian person that Feuerbach has ever met, just like sort of an abstract Christian that he's made up in his head, that he says is, representative of a real Christian. Marx and Engels would later criticize the essence of Christianity in that the idea of a Christian person that Feuerbach has in his head is a product of particular conditions, particular of a particular country, of a particular branch of Christianity, all of these things. And Marx would later write his theses on Feuerbach when he realizes that maybe you shouldn't just be attached to one philosopher, in which he criticizes Feuerbach. Um, the theses on Feuerbach were actually never supposed to be published. They were just his notes while he was thinking about how to break with Feuerbach that he sent to Engels later to read. And Engels would publish them after his death. But in the theses on Feuerbach, Marx makes many, many points about how Feuerbach, um, although believing in materialism, does not seem to understand that material can be changed by human beings and human action, and that materialism requires an understanding that human beings are affected by material and can change material, and that human action is a deciding factor in the world, and also that um, the materialism of Feuerbach is still abstract in that it is not actually grounded in the real world. It is grounded in sort of this abstract idea of truth that Feuerbach has about, material. And Marx ends it with the very famous 11th thesis that the philosophers have hitherto interpreted the world in so many ways. The point is to change it. Um, yeah.
Really good quote. Cheers.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and we're going to be
Super satisfied.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And week 6, I want to say, that is going to be the reading we're going over. It's a very short read too, so highly recommend it.
Puts it out near the bus.
Oh yeah, it's a really short one. And then I'm going to rush through these last like 5 slides, just so you know, because we only have like 20 minutes left. But a little bit more about Hegel's laws, Jews, and mysticism. It's a fun name, but Marx. Remember, so this week, not this week. Last week was Marx's intro to his critique of Hegel's philosophy of the right, and that was still the shortened name version of that name. God, I hate how long the name of that work is. But Marx started working on that and started this like departure from Hegel during his honeymoon. Like, imagine like getting married, you're going on vacation with your new husband, and he just locked himself in a room all day to write. Realistically, I think that's what's going to happen with me and Addie. Like, realistically, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to go study for a little while. I know myself too much at that. But either way, he what he tries to argue in his once you get outside of his intro is it's not just ideas that make history, but history itself is what leads to ideas and is the enactment of ideas. So again, he's building up that idea of base and superstructure. He's still formulating out, he's still thinking through it, but this is where he's starting to get into it. He also distinguishes between this idea of vulgar criticism and true criticism. Vulgar, he's saying, is just when you critique an idea on it by itself. But true criticism comes from when you analyze where the idea came from and understand it, and you try to understand its historical basis, then critique it. That was one of the big things for Marx. He did not like writing something, at least later on. Right now, not so much. He didn't want to write things until he understood it fully. This is why you'll hear pop up many times in class. Marx has an idea to write a book about economics. And then he doesn't do it. And he's like, I need to study more. I need to study more. And he does this for like 20 years straight.
Expect that.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
Yeah. No, and like it comes out in the.
Spectrum.
I think so. Honestly, I'll be surprised if he would.
Yeah.
Dude, okay.
Yes.
I think at this point in the semester, it's chill for me to say, Marx is a train autistic. Like, he loved technology. He got hyper fixated on things. Yeah. I had a quote in my notes that I was like, ooh, should I put this on the slide? Probably not.
97.
Where I was describing Marx and Jenny's relationship as like the hot girl, like the autistic dude and the hot girl, because he yapped too much. Like, you know those memes?
They communicate better.
Yeah, no, like 100%. If he wasn't autistic, I will be surprised. Um, but that's not the point here. But the point is,
What is Jews and mysticism in Hegel's law?
yeah, that is the point. Yeah. So in his critique, he also goes on a little bit as he sees democracy as being almost like the true essence of a proper state. As I said, I haven't read the full philosophy of right and his critique of it. So that's more just something I took from my notes on my summaries that I'm reading. A summary of his life that I'm reading and putting into here. So I may be off misrepresenting him a little bit with that. But finally he arrives in Paris and publishes something known as On the Jewish Question. The whole thing this lecture is built around. only took us about an hour to get to. Um, which was his reply to Bruno Bauer's The Jewish Question. Now, when I first saw the title on The Jewish Question, I don't know about y'all, I got a little spooked there for a minute
Yep.
because it's like, hey, that sounds like it's got to be some anti-Semitic shit. Luckily, it is very much not. Um, he is actually replying to Bruno Bauer and his kind of anti-Semitic shit and saying, hey, stupid, no. But let's get into that. So, okay, cool. I forgot to remove that. So, as you can tell, I rushed through making the slides today a little bit. Um, so on the Jewish question begins with with Bruno Bauer's claim, which was that Jews in Prussia were seeking political emancipation. That's just at the time. Bruno Bauer's claim is that is not logical because they want to be politically emancipated but still have the same uh, rights of faith as Jews, which means they want to be elevated to the same rights as Christians but not adopt Christian beliefs. And Bruno Bauer is like, that's stupid, you can't do that. Marx is like, no, you're the fucking stupid one, and argues against that for a while. That's basically the basis of what Marx is arguing against. So he begins by saying, no, let's first, religion and the state are not the same thing. I know Prussia is a Christian state. They are not the same thing inherently. We'll get into that term Christian state in a bit, but he really wanted to just get that these are separate concepts. If someone wants to end religious discrimination, then you can't. Wait a moment. Let me reread what I wrote for a second. Yeah, if one wants to end religious discrimination by the state, one must end religion entirely and not just for a single group. He's basically saying is if you want to separate out, if you want to claim, I'm trying to think how to phrase this.
He's talking about at the time a really radical thought, which is the First Amendment. Like he's talking about the idea that there should not be a state religion. The state should not be enforcing a state religion. The state should not be policing people's private religions.
Yeah,
That the state needs to be separated from that. So
yeah, yeah. He's just building into
Yeah.
that specific argument.
I also want to say that part of it is also that he's saying that even if you change the laws around Jewish discrimination, even if you legally end Jewish discrimination, that doesn't mean Jewish discrimination is gone.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism will still exist whether or not it is a state policy. The point then is to end religious discrimination on the ground in practical ways, not simply by changing the law. Because the changing of the law does not mean the changing of the enforcement.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Y'all said it better than I would have. So yeah, and Marx then is like, okay, but that makes sense. Why does religion exist? And and he believes that religion comes from societal defects. Not that religion is the defect, but rather that he believes religion only exists as like a bandage to help mend material pains. You're sick of your job, you're not doing well, you have this to look forward to. Now, I disagree with Marx on this, but this class is about Marx's thoughts, not mine. So I'm going to put my thoughts to the side for a minute, hit on this, and just focus on Marx's. And he then believes if you want to make it provide the conditions for people to heal these societal pains, you can't really have like enforced religion on people. You have like as soon as you rip away forcing religion on people, they're exposed to these pains and they're made now to confront it, not hide away in a religion. And if you're forced to confront a pain, you work on the pain. That's Marx's logic. Now, like I said, I kind of disagree. I disagree on Marx, but this was his perspective on it. In addition, he didn't believe in the state policing individuals, like you were mentioning. It's if you wanted to practice a religion, he was not against you. He was against the state enforcing you to practice a religion or to not practice one. Like what you all was saying about the First Amendment, freedom of religion. That's what Marx wanted was practice religion privately. Do not enforce it upon anyone. Do not have it enforced upon you at all. It's something personal. I'm sad that these slides broke a little bit. He also believes like there's like so this part got a little bit cut off, but he's saying that also these issues sometimes issues within the state. He's kind of stepping a bit away from religion for a minute here. Only really exist because a state claims them to exist. So what Marx, birth of capitalism, private property. He, the private property only exists because a state believes it exists and enforces the rights of this belief that it has. It doesn't just materially just exist.
No, it's okay. It's
Was it the same guy?
no, it's different.
Different person?
It's fine.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
No, it's cool. It's us.
It's us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm like,
Flynn, grab your
You're
chair.
invited.
They're fitting in.
Yeah, you're
oh,
good.
okay.
Bedtime.
Hey, no worries. You're good.
No,
But so Marx very much is like, hey, the state, if the state can claim something to exist and make it exist, that kind of means something. He doesn't explore it too super deeply. But he starts to kind of poke a little bit of like, what is a state? Um, Marx also calls out that like the state like on the surface saying a atheist state and having a religious civil society is a contradiction. And, but Marx also leans into why is that a contradiction? These states and civil society here, think of it meaning just the people. There's more to that term in political science, but Marx is using it here just to mean the general populace. He says, why are those opposite sides here? They're only contradictory sides of the state versus the people because the state makes it so. So if the people being religious, this contradicts the state being atheistic. They're only a contradiction because the state decided the people are uh, are different from the state. Marx will develop this more later into his ideas of communism, but he's starting to get this idea of the state can shape a lot of our perceptions. There's this idea that runs in the background of the state doing a lot of things. So that's just something to be aware of again. In addition, there's political conflicts around Jewish citizenship in Prussia. He was also pointed out these are not attacks on citizenship, but a plea for political emancipation. Jewish people weren't asking just to be citizens of Prussia. They were asking to be treated as people within the political system. It wasn't a question about who deserves citizenship. It was a question of, hey, we deserve to be treated fairly as well. Um, he then also goes into, okay, we've been talking about this for a while. What does it mean to say a Christian state? That's Marx sees that as a negation of itself. I put a little quote here that by degrading the forms of the state to mere semblance, it equally degrades religion to mere semblance. What he's saying there is if you try to impose a state religion, it's no longer a religion. It's now now it's just a facade on top of it. If we want a modern example, we can honestly think of the current Israeli state. They like it's a Jewish state, but it's not but the state can't really be Jewish. I'm not going to get too into that. Honestly, when it comes to Zionism, it occurred after Marx's lifetime. so that's not going to come up too much in this class. But just for a modern example.
The super non-complex modern example is that like Christmas is not a religious holiday to all of us because it's the dominant culture. And every year, a couple Christians get really mad.
Yeah.
We're not doing it religious.
And Easter is all about candy and eggs, not about Jesus.
Yeah.
And breaking Lent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, that it profanes the sacred. That literally for the state to enter in religion, it removes any of the sacred aspects to which religion can be claimed, and then drags it down to it instead of making it all about faith and eternal, it's about compliance.
When you're
Yeah.
forced to engage in a
Yeah.
religion because of the state,
Yeah.
that's the same as you not walking outside of a crosswalk.
Everyone,
You don't choose your own faith. You don't do it especially in your home. You're doing it performatively.
Yeah. And like he makes very clear that he's not against it. He's not for the destruction of religion. He's for political emancipation. But when it comes to the state, a state being religious inherently also devalues what a state means. A state is meant to be the authority. Marx didn't define it this way, but colloquially, the state is the system that has a monopoly on violence. It's the system of control. Marx is like, okay, if you're claiming to have full control over a region, and then you claim you're religious and giving control to a deity, you don't have control over the region. You're saying a deity does that's acting through you, basically saying a divine right's a king. Marx is like, you're fucking stupid if you think that you're acting in name of a religion while also acting independently of other power sources. You're not really a state. You exist in contradiction to yourself, and you devalue yourself at the same time. But Bauer, Marx kind of brings Bauer back in for a moment. This is what On the Jewish Question is writing against is Bauer's ideas. And Bauer's like, okay, but Jews are kind of hypocrites. They want these like the rights of man. They want, and the privileges of faith, and that just doesn't work. You can't have both. And Marx is like, why the fuck not? And then, if you read the text, he just quotes the rights of man. He's like, why is this contradictory to allowing people to practice their own religion? Yeah, like Marx's whole thing is, Bauer, you're kind of stupid with your arguments. I know we're getting close to time. I'm going to go a bit over time. If you have to leave, you're welcome to. I am going to run a little bit over time today.
Bauer is arguing for what has classically been what Jews have been forced to do for thousands of years, that, oh, if you want to become part of the state, the dominant state is Christian, therefore you have to, like Jewish conversos in Spain after the Reconquista, like, oh, you want to become, that's fine, but you give up your Judaism. And you have to give up these things and become part of the dominant culture. And Marx is saying, no, we can be a polytheistic cult, like that's the client. Like you don't need to give up this part of yourself to become part of the dominant structure.
Yeah, exactly. And then Marx continues forward and actually continues with this whole idea of like rights of man and rights of the religion. And he's like, they're not even contradictory. If anything, they need each other because where they clash, where these ideals of man comes from. Europe was religious. They came out of religion still. There was still this religious influence on it. Marx doesn't reject that. He doesn't say that the rights of man came solely out of material conditions. He says it came out of the ideas of religion. He just says that religion came out of material conditions. So there's still this like religious influence that needs to be understood to understand in what was called the rights of man at the time. And rights of man was a specific doctrine. If you read the thing, it will say like rights of man, and then Marx quotes the rights of man. So when I say the rights of man, I am referring to something specific. When I say religious privilege or rights of religion, there was nothing specific about that. That was just something Bruno Bauer kind of pulled out of his ass. Um, Marx also here does something interesting. Now, he defines private property in a way that will completely contradict how you will define it later on. So I want to bring this up here as a point of this was Marx's early definition. This is not how Marx sees private property like 2 years later. I do literally mean 2 years later, because like he starts writing other works soon. At the time, he saw private property as just the rights to do with one thing however you please. That's what I mean. A lot of conservatives and a lot of liberals, a lot of people just who aren't studying Marx, honestly, believe private property to be is just, hey, it's my stuff. This is private property to a uh, welcome back, private property to me. And Marx bought into that for a little while.
Is that personal property? I'm trying to make sure.
That
No,
is
that's
personal property. You are correct. That Marx will throw away this definition pretty fast.
Yeah.
This is more being brought up as a historical note, not something to actually memorize and remember. Marx was not a communist yet. Yeah. Um, in next week's lecture, he'll start to be. But that's for next week.
Are you hoping that we'll start to be too?
What?
Are you hoping that we'll start to be too?
We'll see if that
Martial
happens.
You can't say anything on yes.
Oh no, I could say that on cam. But he also contends a little bit of like notions of liberty and what that means here. He also there's an important term that comes up here that exists early in his writings and will disappear, but in my opinion, forms into his ideas of alienation, and that is species being. What that means is the ability to see yourself as part of like this. Think of it as like the feeling of being like feeling human, feeling alive, and feeling in community at the same time. Being able to look at anything and be like, yeah, we as a species did that, and really connecting with what it means to be a person. It's kind of the way Marx says like human nature, but not exactly human nature. It's something you still have to develop awareness of. And like, we're gonna get more into species being later on, and then it's gonna fall out of his terminology basically permanently. It's just one of those like philosophical ideas that Marx is good to know uh, it's good to know about Marx as a philosopher, but Marx as an activist, Marx as an economist, it falls out. But it's a beautiful concept in my opinion. Yeah. And he believes that only when people see themselves as like they look at their fellow person, they see that solidarity, will human emancipation, will freedom truly be achieved. To me, that kind of sounds like anarchism, but yeah. Um, and yeah, and then Marx kind of takes a step back. He goes back to Bauer. He's like, and looks at Bauer's claim. Because Bauer claims that Jews hold some power in Prussia still, despite them being at a lower class status. And Marx actually agrees with him on that. But Marx disagrees on why. Bauer says it's because they're Jewish. He's basically going into like, oh, the Jews control things type of vibes. Marx is like, no, you fucking idiot. Um, he says it's not due to religion, but due to wealth. Like, okay. We've heard like we've heard like stereotypes of Jewish people being greedy. How is this not anti-Semitic? And Marx gets into that. Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, because it's talking about how this is that period when that's on the scales, the tipping point. Because the reason why for a couple thousand years within Christian society, a place for many Jews has been as moneylenders, because within Jewish culture, it's acceptable to lend money at interest to non-Jews, whereas within Christian culture, it's absolutely forbidden. And so Jews have been there on the sufferance of the monarch in many countries, like, hey, you're here on, I'll let you be here, but every once in a while, I'm gonna come in and just scoop up all your excess profits you've made and use it for my slush fund, and you can't say shit because, otherwise I'll just unleash the pogroms on you.
Yeah.
So it's really been a difficult position for them.
Yeah, and like Marx, he doesn't get into that, which honestly I'm a little surprised he didn't. But what he does say is like, yeah, this whole idea of like Jews to go try and make a lot of money. Well, yeah, when you are when power and money are related. If you're not financially well off, you'd have like no power. So if you're in a social class that has no power and you're being stomped on, the only way to gain power is what you can do and if you can find ways to gain some money, like you were saying, that gives you some power to exist. So,
The way he words it does sound very anti-Semitic in the on the Jewish question, as he says, let's look at the secular Jew, not the religious Jew. The practical Jew, their god is money. Money is the jealous god of Israel. Um, that is a quote
yeah,
on the Jewish question.
yeah, Marx, I will say that is one thing where
It doesn't sound great.
he uses Judaism as a motif a lot towards the end, and it does sound hella anti-Semitic. It's honestly one of those things where it's like, damn, Marx, I wish you like the intent is there to be more positive, but Marx was living in a society where, yeah, that was normal, and he didn't really care. He didn't see himself as Jewish, despite everyone around him seeing him as that, despite him growing up at within that community. So he did have some anti-Semitic sayings. However, the core of what he's saying is never anti-Jew, and that's something that I think is very interesting about Marx. Is his own relation to Judaism is very fraught. He supports Judaism. He supports people being Jewish, but there is a bit of like a bit of like distaste around it. I think because of his mother, if I'm being completely honest. He, like I said, his mother was a stressor in his life because she was thrown into a situation she never asked to be in and forced to convert. And your family is the first place you learn from. So if your exposure to your ethnic religion is through that, you might struggle. I think that's where Marx's kind of anti-Semitic sayings come from. Because I can't read Marx and say he hates Jews or hates Judaism. But I do think he has that like background where he's has a distaste to to Judaism as a concept through his family, but not to the people. I he's so that's I'll be honest, that kind of covers a little bit more of what I was going to say. I think we did it pretty well. We mentioned how religion comes out of materialism under Marx's view, and he saw Judaism doing that. He saw Christianity doing that. Uh, Um, and he really only you put up more.
There's on the billboard right outside, the one that's right down the hall, so I mean.
Yeah, no, we see that we rip it down.
Yeah.
You know what? Fuck it. Y'all see that extra credit ripping it down. Yeah, why not?
How many points per head?
Let's see how many there are. I'm going to say if there's.
Scavenger hunt.
There we go. Look. You need a maximum of 240 points to get a like perfect score. So you collect 240 of them, you just pass. Yeah. And I do have a extra credit. You do activism, you get extra credit, so that counts as activism. You know, yeah.
No, it's not.
We go off group. I hired a photographer.
Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah. So honestly, I'll be honest, I think that just kind of concludes today's lecture. I don't really have much more to say. I was going to end on this question of like, should states and religion be separated? How does culture influence us? Oh no, this isn't me. I'm just asking y'all. All right, yeah, we'll go over it real fast. I am going to stop the recording at this point, just so you know. So, anyone online, thank you for joining. Yeah.